Someone comes up to you and they're like, "Hey, brethren."
Brosif.
What?
Broski. Bro Montana.
Okay, we need to start over.
No!
Yes! I mean, we can put this somewhere in there. Yeah, breaking out and snorting in the middle of the podcast. Hey, welcome into episode 4 of the City Movement Podcast. We're looking at the heart this season, and we are just excited to keep on doing it now. Mike, why don't you just give us a little intro to where we've been and where we're going?
I would love to. That was a great start.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All right. We are doing the heart because God says from the heart is the wellspring of life. Like everything flows from it. And so this season, we're not focused on best practices or little tips for living or things like that. But if we address the heart as we resource the why and as we resource churches in whys, we're praying that the fruit that will come from these podcasts will be just like deep, spiritual, and everlasting. How about those 3 words? Jensen, is that?
One more.
One more, and nourishing to the soul.
Oh. Thank you. Oh. That
Would
just
you
did
add
something to me.
or take away anything from that?
No. I think it's important to note that we want to give this resource because we believe in the why so much.
Yeah.
The reason why I say that is because you think about the why, this is a perfect place to counsel people, to give people the answers of life in a way that doesn't feel daunting. You know, you think about like times where you want to help a friend out. It's the time where he's finally come to you and his life is blowing up and you're sitting around a fire and you're wanting to deliver this whatever, big word of wisdom. But I think that the why is a great place that you're with people in the day-to-day. You're not waiting for that big moment to give answers for the tough things of life. And there are people that you interact with all the time at the why that are struggling with humility. They're struggling with forgiveness. They're all the things that we'll cover.
Yeah.
And I think this is a great resource for us to answer some of those questions.
Yeah. And I think it's important to talk about the heart because so many times when we meet people in those spaces, it's easy to just try and diagnose the symptoms, and just like, hey, well, this is what you need to do with this little thing that's going on. And Jesus was very clear when he said it's out of the overflow of the heart that the mouth speaks. And it's out of the overflow of the heart that I would say that we live our lives. And if we just stay on the surface and try and deal with the symptoms, we're not actually getting to the root issue that's kind of manifesting itself in these different ways. And so even in the why, it's like whether it is in the weight room or sometimes we'll just work in the lobby and we'll have opportunities to counsel YMCA staff who just stop by and talk with us or a member who just walks in. It's so helpful to try and be thinking what's going on in this person's heart, because that's where the root issue is. And that's why we want to talk about things like pride. And that's why we want to talk about things like anxiety, because those are things that start in your heart and they come out in other ways.
Yeah, that's good. All right, so today, fellas, here we go. To resource the why in the church. Mm-hmm. The biggest thing I would say that I'm looking for, if a guy comes to Christ and wants to serve, and we are making disciples. So our churches are longing to make disciples, be a part of the Great Commission. The YMCA, there's employees that are looking to have meaningful lives in their vocation and minister to others and make disciples. Like the thing that I would say that I'm looking for
is the size of his muscles.
Is his musculares.
Which is why you are a great disciple for Mike Newman, because look at those things.
Look at these pythons.
Would be this, ready? Would be his willingness.
What's the Spanish word
for that? That's a good...
¿Cómo se dice?
¿Cómo se dice?
Willingness.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. When I was in Spanish class, I took all the way up to Spanish 4 in high school, and I learned the phrase "Cómo se dice" really well.
Yeah,
I just asked, "Cómo se dice?"
¿Cómo se dice Spanish?
En español? Espagnol. Sí.
Is a willing heart. Is this person willing to do whatever for the Lord. So maybe if we just phrased it differently, what would you guys say keeps people from serving the Lord?
When we were talking off the pod, Jeff, I feel like your answer to this was a great one.
Oh,
You ready to deliver it?
wow. Thank you.
Kat was asking for it.
Okay, well, let me tell it to you, Kat.
Okay.
My thought was we were talking about a willing heart and what keeps people from it. And I think the biggest thing, this is a large encompassing theme in people's lives, I just think it's fear.
Mm-hmm.
I think when we think about the willing heart, we think about like Jesus, we're going to talk about this later maybe, but Jesus in Luke 15 talks about the cost of discipleship. And he basically says, if you're going to be a follower, a disciple of Jesus, kind of like you must be willing to go everywhere and do anything and give up anything for the sake of following Jesus.
Yeah.
And what keeps us, I would put myself in this category sometimes, right, from doing all of those things, from being that willing, it's fear. It's fear of the unknown. Fear of like, well, what will I have to give up, like if I do that, or what will I say in the conversation if I really take a deep dive into it? So I just think the large, all-encompassing thing, what keeps us from being willing, it's fear. So if in previous episodes we said like, how do we approach humility? Well, first we have to talk about pride.
Right.
And I think if we say, how do we approach a willing heart? I think first we talk about, what does God say about fear? What do we do with our fear?
Yeah.
So
I almost feel like that it's fear, and then you like take that, you become more specific with that, and it's selfishness of losing something.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of times about evangelism, that people don't evangelize out of fear, but more than that, out of selfishness. They're afraid of looking dumb and stupid. They're afraid of losing spiritual credibility or like intellect. You know, even the same way, like even when you asked me, the other day to preach at your church, I'm like, I feel selfish because I obviously had to ask Jeff, hey, is it okay? Can I go to Mike's church or whatever? But then you go a step deeper than that, and you feel afraid because you're like, I don't want to look stupid again. I've been preaching and teaching students, and then I go to another church, and I don't want to look stupid. I don't want to lose credibility. I want to like give them something good. And it's not my instinct should be, man, I can't wait to go to Mike's church to preach at his church and to talk about the Lord. Like, I don't know, it reminds me of Paul's words, is like, why do I do the very thing that I don't want to do, and why don't I do the very thing that I want to do? It's like, I'm a pastor, I'm a preacher. I should want to preach about God, but yet still I'm afraid of doing it. I think more than fear, it's under fear, it's selfishness. I'm afraid of losing something. And you could probably not only say that for evangelism or the spiritual acts, you could say that in your normal life. I don't want to have this hard conversation. I don't want to be proven wrong. I don't want someone to, there's so many examples.
That's at a heart level. Good job.
Thanks.
So go ahead.
Whoa.
Fun biblical trivia fact. There are 365 verses that say "do not fear" in the Bible.
Right.
One for every day of the year,
except
for leap year.
So we can fear for one day on leap years.
That's the year of Jubilee.
But it's December. This ep will probably drop in January. But,
I think this episode will drop next week.
You think?
Yeah, pre-Christmas.
So pre-Christmas. Okay. So can you guys think of any biblical Christmas examples where it says "do not fear"?
Oh, I got one.
What you got?
I actually just taught on
what
this.
You got?
Angelic.
So weird. Yeah, Gabriel.
Yeah.
What up? Which, by the way, Gabriel's been around the block for a long time. He's in the book of Isaiah. He's delivering some tough news. Then he shows up again hundreds of years later. I wonder if he changed his appearance.
Oh.
Wow. At all.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
It's just cool to think about these things, right? Okay, let's be a little childlike, guys. Come on. Don't be so... I don't know. But yeah, he shows up to both Mary and Elizabeth.
Did you get a haircut, by the way?
Yeah. It's starting the mullet.
Oh, wow.
What is that called? The European...
You just went through
soccer?
all the emotions. You went, oh, yeah.
I saw the front and I was like, oh,
no.
Are we doing this again?
I like it.
Oh, my goodness.
Do not be afraid, Jeff.
Do you think Jeff and I could rock that?
Absolutely
I think
not.
that you could.
You think so?
Yeah,
I'm way
Jeff.
too high and tight for that.
The
thing.
silver
Yeah.
fox could do it, huh?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, all right. All
Did
right.
you just give yourself the name to the
Oh, it's
Silver
been
Fox?
there. It's been there. Okay, so bringing us back, what willing heart? Okay,
Yeah.
we're kind of going fear, willing, fear. Let's just like spend a few minutes grounding ourselves with biblical examples of willingness. Who are the guys and girls? Let's come up with 4 or 5 of them.
Yeah.
that are willing to serve the Lord.
Yeah, Gabriel shows up. He tells Mary and Elizabeth, hey, you're going to have a baby.
Yeah.
For Elizabeth, it's interesting because she ends that passage where she's like, oh my gosh, the reproach of God is off of me because she's waited so long to have a child. But yet, this is kind of extra biblical outside of it. But she has to hide for 5 months. She keeps herself hidden for 5 months, and
Husband's
she's
not talking
old.
to her.
Yeah, her husband's mute, and so I'd imagine that's still challenging. And for her, having to deal with those things, I think that it's just cool to see her faithfulness. And then we see ultimately Mary being also told that you're going to have a baby too. She's pregnant out of wedlock. Like, what are other people thinking? And what does she say? She says, "Let it be according to your word."
Yeah, the greatest willing response ever.
She says also in
100%.
there,
Yeah.
I'm the Lord's servant. Something
Yeah.
like that, right?
Yeah.
Let it be according to
Yes.
you.
Yeah.
And she was blessed because she believed that he would do what he said.
Yeah. Not only that, I'm sure for both of you that whenever you found out that, Kelsey was pregnant, Hannah was pregnant, that it was a mixed bag of emotions. You're like, oh my gosh, this is awesome.
Yeah.
Also like a little daunting, scary. But being told that, hey, you're going to give birth to the greatest men to ever live. That was what was told to Elizabeth. That was what was told to Mary.
Yeah.
That's intimidating. And they said, let it be according to your word.
It's great. Great example.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
Another
you.
example.
Well, that's the example I was going to use.
Really?
Okay.
Yeah. So,
I'll go next.
okay,
then.
go next.
Isaiah. So to bring in some Old Testament, he's before the throne of God. I can just imagine his face, his jaws dropping. He's so enamored with the angels and God himself and the shining brightness, glory, right? And God says, hey, I need someone to go to the people, and they're actually going to reject you. And his response, Isaiah 6:8, here I am, send me. So, you don't see in the Hebrew any parenthetical statements of like, here I am, as long as the ministry looks like this, or as long as my life is going to be the way I want it, then you can send me, But it was this all out, some say the blank check heart, it's like just wherever, whenever, I'll follow you, and it doesn't matter because my life is yours. So there's the Isaiah one. Was that enough time?
Yeah, no, I mean,
Okay.
it's not in our notes, but I think Paul is a great example of a willing heart. Like what's the Romans passage where he says, to the weak I became weak, to the poor I became poor.
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing, but I became all things to all men so that by all means I might save some. To me, that's like a pinnacle example of a willing heart, of just saying like, whatever it takes, I'll become like all people so that they can be reached through me. The disciples, when they were called by Jesus in, Matthew 4? When they cast their nets and they catch all the fish.
Yeah.
And Jesus says, follow me. It just says they leave their nets and follow him.
Yeah.
There doesn't appear to be like a long period of like, should I do this? Should I
That's
not
right.
do this? Weigh the pros
Yeah.
and cons.
Yeah.
Their willing hearts just said yes.
That's right.
But that's where I think like I don't want to go too far ahead of ourselves, because I don't think what any of us would say is like, well, if you're struggling with a willing heart, just do it. Counsel me in this. I hear that Mary had a willing heart, Isaiah had a willing heart, the disciples had a willing heart. That's great. An angel literally appeared to Mary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Isaiah had a vision of being in the throne room.
Mm-hmm.
And Paul had a radical encounter with Jesus where he was blinded.
Yeah.
So it's like, that hasn't happened to me. And I'm scared. Okay, so yeah, I mean, if Gabriel appeared to me, I guess I wouldn't be scared anymore because he'd be telling me to do it. I'm like, yeah, sure.
Sure.
So what do I don't know. I'm scared, Mike. I'm actually afraid that I would lose my job if I went and had that spiritual conversation that you want me to be willing to have at work. What should I do? I want to be willing, but like I don't know if that's worth it to me.
Yeah. So willingness doesn't equate to busyness, or necessarily doing everything. So I think what you're surfacing is this issue of, if I'm willing, does that mean that I have no boundaries, guidance, or leading in my life? I just always have to do everything.
No, I think I'm saying, like, I don't know. Maybe the situation is like there's a person. Let's go outside the why, because a lot of our listeners have other jobs and stuff too. I have a coworker, and I'm willing to have a spiritual conversation with them, but I actually think, I don't know, what if I get fired? You're not supposed to talk about that stuff at work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, what do I do with that?
I mean, I would say, like, you think about who God is. Like, you start there in your own heart. Is he, and this is getting outside of, like, the practical, what I'd say to you face to face, but maybe I would say this, is that who is God to you? Like, who is God to you? Is he your God? Is he another guy? Is he your boss? Is he a friend? I think more than that, he is your highest authority. He's the universe's highest authority, and that what he says goes. And I don't think that we need to wait around to be obedient. We just go for it. And two, I would say, like, what your question was is a really good one, because you were saying initially, even though I'm not feeling it, should I just go for it regardless? And I think that we are in some ways psychosemantic people, that like when we act in obedience, our heart catches up with our actions. And I think there is a level of, I think we can all point to times in our life where we don't want to do something, but we do it and find ourselves liking it as we do it, or seeing it worth it. Yeah. But I think regardless of where our feelings are, we do that thing because of who God is. I think also the second thing I would say is that, like, you should do it because it would be a benefit to you. It reminds me of Philemon 6, is that it is to your advantage that you'd share your faith. And it's kind of a strange verse, because it's like when I think about sharing my faith, I'm like, it just feels like it has an external product that when you share your faith, this person will come to know Christ, or they don't. And I can base that. I can really evaluate my success or failure based off of that person's response. But actually in evangelism, that when we share our faith, when we do these things externally, it has an internal product that I think that, really simply put, it galvanizes our relationship between us and God. That it gives us skin in the game, that whenever we do things for the Lord, it brings us closer to Him. That there is a internal, personal benefit to doing it. So even if that person doesn't respond well, even if the externals aren't there, your boss, likes it, that person you share your faith with likes it, the rest of your coworkers, the truth is that doing these things actually has a personal benefit to you spiritually.
Yeah.
And maybe to add to that, I mean, like Jensen just counseled you with the word to have courage to obey him based off of God's character, things like that. I mean, I think this is where questions are helpful, because the scenario that you created, you said, well, should I just share my faith? What if I get fired? And so the fear that we should ask is like, tell me what you're afraid of. This is real, right? Of getting fired. I would guess it's probably the loss of finances, and I can't provide, and this and that. And so I think that would take us down a path of let's keep a track record of the Lord's faithfulness in your life. What are your options? So there's some practicals there. I think to say it again, we're resourcing Y staff and churches. I would say that God is very honored when Y staff functions in submission to their CEO. And so, like, they shouldn't run rogue and and just like and the word is used, proselytize. And everyone they should be respectful and honor their authorities, and in doing, they honor God.
Yeah.
That doesn't keep say, hey, keep your mouth shut all the time, because Daniel didn't do that, in the Bible. But like, I would say, hey, Jeff, like, could you handle it like this? Could you offer outside of work hours? Hey, I'd love to buy you a cup of coffee. It sounds like you've got a lot of questions about how to walk with the Lord as it relates to your job.
Yep.
And I would love to share some ideas and share some scripture and things like that, and we can go from there. I think that would be a really respectful way to handle it, yet maintain a boldness.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we got to be willing to get fired and do the right thing. To at some point you got to swim out on the boat and throw over the tee, right?
Yeah.
At some point you got to say, throw me in the lion's den, or no, I'm not gonna bow to that idol. Or so, like, all of us were created to obey God and give Him glory, and that's a chief way to do it.
Man, that's why podcasting is great. Because I think if someone at a Y were to just take my answer, I think they would go rogue. They'd dress up like a Navajo Indian, dump the tea out, do the thing, Like, they would just do these things. I'm kind of making a serious point, is that, like, the Bible is so simple enough that there are a few things that can really challenge certain areas of our life, but also it's holistic enough that we, like, wrestle with the tensions and the depth of it for so long. Because I think that as we just talk about these things with other brothers in Christ, we are challenged and pushed in certain areas. It's like, as I am bold, how can I be wise and gentle? And I think sometimes we can oversimplify the Bible, and other times complicate it and not do anything at all as a result of it. So that was a great response.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think as this episode kind of rounds third, the question that we have to answer, and then we would obviously want our listeners to answer, would be like, what's keeping you from serving the Lord, with a special lens to willingness? Like, is there something that's holding you back, whether it's fear or selfishness you mentioned, that in what ways can we break down that barrier, like release this burden and help people to walk free in the calling, in the life that God has given them? Could
we maybe, because I don't actually know if we've done this, well, how would you define, like, what it means to serve the Lord with a willing heart?
Yeah. You want to take a crack at that?
Yeah. It makes me think of the blessed are the persecuted. I don't think it's people that go looking to get into trouble or go looking to, really stir things up, whatever it is. I think it's somebody that is willing to obey God despite circumstances. I think that's
but you can't
heart.
Use willing in the definition of willing.
Okay. And that's someone that is able. That someone that is.
I'm just helping my girls write their papers.
Yeah. Yeah. Is obedience, unconditional obedience.
Yeah.
A heart that is
willing.
Try. Dang, that's hard. Willing.
Yeah. I'd choose the word surrender.
Yeah, I was going to say just to give God our yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So a willing heart is a person that is surrendered in all ways, like with especially the results. I'm gonna surrender the results to you, whatever that person says or whatever happens or whatever Hannah and I we're surrendering our finances right now. So we're willing to give to the Lord of our finances, and we're scared of the outcome. It's like, oh, it's tight, and so like, I'm just trying to bring out another example besides like evangelism. It's like the willingness to follow the Lord and trust Him.
Yeah.
We're willing to let our daughter go off to this school, even though it's far away, right? Yeah. Because we want her to follow the Lord, and we want to, and so we're surrendering. I thought she was going to go closer, and I thought life was going to look like this, and I thought that, and so we're laying those down and saying, your will, your glory, your kingdom forever and ever. Amen.
Yeah.
That kind of prayer.
Yeah.
So
And also a hopeful expectation that God will do something great on the other side of it.
Yeah.
Not just like, Lord, I don't know what you're going to do, whatever. We can trust that whatever is on the other side of it is good. Because I think that we can put God in a box is if I have this hard conversation with somebody and they respond well, success. They respond poorly, failure. But actually, no matter their response, what just happened is good, and God will use it for good things. And I am a part of that process.
yeah.
I think some people live these meaningless lives where they never get into the mud and the muck of doing ministry or life as a Christian, and they actually keep themselves from the joy of walking in a meaningful life that is filled with difficulty. Mm-hmm. Like I think of a lot of seasons in my life as a pastor where I feel like I'm not challenging, I'm not pushing people. And honestly, I think we look forward to those seasons where we don't feel like we go through hard things. But, man, I look back on some of those moments where I had challenging conversations and I felt so close to God. And He uses those difficulties to draw us closer to Him.
Yeah.
That's good.
That's good. Did we answer your question that you asked when I said we should define what a willing heart is?
I think he ended up answering it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. I thought so too.
Because I use willing in my definition.
Yeah. Is there any, before we wrap up, any personal story you would want to share about what the time when it might have been hard or easy for you to respond with a willing heart and what it looked like on the other side?
Yeah. This
You obviously
describes
just-
the whole Christian life to me.
Yeah.
And so there's a number of stories that would come to mind. Do you have any aching ones right now that you want to share?
Yeah, I can go. I remember, I feel like this is a great why example.
Yeah.
Me and you, we love to weightlift and talk about ministry and pastoring, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And people interrupt our conversations all the time. And I think there are times where it's like, I would just rather talk with you, Mike, than some of the people I interact with at the Y. And I think that I need to get over that because there's so many great opportunities. Like you and I, we have plenty of times to meet up. Like if I want to, if that conversation gets ruined, I can just call you afterwards and talk about the thing I wanted to talk about. But there are people that we miss in our Ys.
Yeah.
Do you remember when we maybe Cosmo listens to this. Do you remember Cosmo that came and
remember
brought in
Cosmo.
the treadmills?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Dude, we got to share the gospel with him. That was a time where there's probably a plethora, a myriad of success stories of being of failures, of being willing. But this is one of the few times where I feel like God overcame my stubbornness.
Yeah.
And I remember we took the time. This guy was like jumping into our deadlifts. He was like, "Oh, let me try this. I played football in college," and we were like, "Okay, let's do it. Get in here, Cosmo. Tell us some things about yourself." And I remember we got to a point where we just shared with him that we're both believers, and we got to share the gospel with him. And he asked, "What's like a good?" Or no, I think he was about to leave, and I said, "Cosmo, just do me a favor. When you go home, I want you to read Ephesians 2. The crown jewel. Go home, read Ephesians 2, 1 through 10." And I just wanted to keep the conversation short, but I felt like God wanted me to just give this guy the time of day.
Yeah.
And
I think that's a really good example. And to me, that's one of the ultimate examples from the life of Jesus, is it seems that Jesus was always willing to stop and be interrupted.
Yeah.
He lived a life that was willing to say, whatever the Father is putting in front of me, I'm willing to stop. And that's exactly what ministry at the Y is like sometimes, or in our workplaces, or as we're just walking around in our towns, to have hearts that are willing to say, wherever the Father is directing me, I will go there and respond.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always have to be the big things. It's not always like,
That's right.
am I willing to leave my career and do something else, or am I willing to send my daughter halfway across the country to school? Sometimes, and this is probably the area that's the most challenging for me, it's like, am I willing to be interrupted every day and just address the people that are there across from me or there with me? So that's a really good example.
Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
So.
For me, the most recent that comes to mind is I got an email this week from a woman at our church who, she came to the harvest dinner, ministering to the Y, things like that with her husband, and afterwards she's praying, she's given her like time to the Lord, and I get an email saying, "Hey, our community group, we would love to, instead of doing a gift exchange with each other, we would love to pool some money and help anyone at the Y, any families at the Y or staff at the Y. Do you know it? Do you know anyone?" Right? And that's like the blessing of a pastor. You get kind of this front row seat to get to see people and their hearts moved towards others, and then you get to play middleman. But just in terms of a willingness, she doesn't know the final outcome, so she's willing to be flexible, whatever. She didn't have this hey, we're going to serve the Lord, and it has to be this way to this person. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the Lord leads directly in it, but she's she's willing to send the email. She's willing to coordinate her group, and so she's sticking her neck out for Jesus.
Yeah.
And it might turn out awesome. She might not ever be thanked. Yeah. But she's willing. So I think that's the most recent one that comes to mind.
Yeah, that's really good. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I maybe just to close us, we were talking about this beforehand, but we've talked about D.L. Moody before on this mm-hmm. podcast, just a YMCA icon, Western evangelical Christianity icon. One of his most famous quotes that we've heard said before is, "The world has yet to see what God can do with a man fully consecrated," or I think you could maybe substitute a different word in there, fully willing, fully willing for him, to do whatever God is telling him to do. Then he says, "By God's help, I aim to be that man." And that's our prayer for our own lives. It's and it's by God's help. I love it. He say, "By God's help." It's not like I am going to be that man, or I am going to be, we all need, 1 Timothy, that we don't have a spirit of fear. We all need God to help us be more willing in our hearts. And to go away from fear and towards willingness. So anything that you guys would say in closing?
I think our world would look a lot different if the church was more willing.
Yep.
Right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we could say that about a number of characteristics, but willing is the decision to put yourself out there regardless of what happens to you and outcome. And man, I think that there would be more families that stay together, more people coming to know Christ. I think this willingness I think Jesus, he saved it best for last in the Sermon on the Mount, or the Beatitudes, is blessed are the persecuted. Little Google notification. But I think he saved it best for last, is this is the most important one. He actually talks about it twice, is that when you go through suffering, when you put yourself out there is a great reward for you. It's his longest beatitude, and I think it's really important for the church to understand that there is great reward for going through suffering, regardless of outcome, and doing it because God's word says so, and we're servants of the Lord.
Yeah. Amen.
There's great reward for willingness.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Well, hey, thanks for joining with us. We'll be back soon to talk about another aspect of what we're looking at the heart this season. For Mike Newman and Jeff Snyder, I am Jeff Snyder. And for Jensen Harper, this is the City Movement Podcast.